My name is Victoria Vimala. This is my truth, my story. I'm originally from Guyana. I was born in Susdijk, East Bank Demerara. I also grew up a little bit in the Essequibo coast of Guyana. I grew out of poverty. Among myself, I had another brother. My mother was a housewife. My father was an alcoholic and he was very abusive. He beat my mother many days and many nights. It's not easy seeing my father come home drunk and wrap my mother's hair and slam her head all over the wall and beat her, and my brother and I screamed for help. The pictures and the feelings are still in my head of what I grew up into. And not only growing up in poverty or growing up in an abusive home, I was born male, and growing up as a little boy wasn't easy because the heart says something and the mind says another. I started to question my identity from age 5, but more or less I believe it was younger than that, because ever since I knew myself, I was feminine and I knew I was a girl. Being feminine invites persecution upon my life. My father would be embarrassed and family members would mock my dad and said they have a daughter instead of a son. My mother would hit me because she feel that I can change. My family tried their best to prevent me from being feminine. The feminine inside of me would always come out. Wearing makeup and feminine clothing wasn't what I always wanted, but it's what I always needed. Things my mother would say to me is avoid putting on my sari and makeup when I'm not home. She tried her best and took me to doctors to make me whole, to make me a man, to make me a boy. The doctors said that I was born with only female hormones. It was hard to accept at that time. There wasn't really anyone I could have talked to about who I was. In Guyana, it's either you're gay or lesbian, but I knew I was a woman. At that point, there wasn't any knowledge about transgender. Growing up, I was feminine. I was perceived to be gay. Some of the things my family did to try to make me male was giving me hard labor work, sent me to the wood factory, to the farm, into the pastures to look after the cattle, the cow and goat, doing yard work like any other male would. I knew this is not who I was. I am Hindu. I was born Hindu. I was not accepted in a Hindu temple. I wasn't being put out, but I was being persecuted, and people would call me anti-man, people would say batty boy, people would say that's a sinner. So I decided to change my faith and go to Christian church. I went in the Christian church. I would sing in the choir, but by the time I come out, people would do the same thing to me. So I never felt like I was appreciated or accepted. I had faith. I knew one day everything is going to be okay, and I would stand up and show the world that I would be a better person and prove everyone wrong. Trying to fit into society in a third world country hasn't been easy for me. Focusing on my education, focusing on the problems at home, and focusing to fit into society was even worse. I tried to make male friends. I tried my best to be a boy, but somehow or the other, the feminine inside of me would always come out. I would end up talking soft, walking girlish, and end up at the end of the day being among girls as my friends. I tried to blend in with male. Going to play football, they include me in the football, but at the end of that game, I was the ball. I complained to my teachers, but no one helped. No one helped. In fact, the teacher would tell me, why don't you be a man or be a boy, that boys must be boys, not girls, and blend in and fit in, try your best. No one had took the time to understand and get to know what I was going through or what this child was going through. My mother went to Venezuela. She got a job in Venezuela. I would cry for my mother every single day. I had tried suicide twice. I consumed poison. I tried to hang myself, but nothing worked. When I consumed the poison in front of my dad and my grandparents, I told them this is the end. There's not going to be any more of me. And before they could have done anything, I drank it. 3 days later, I recovered and I was in the hospital. My father brought me home. Everyone asked me, "Why did you do that? Why did you do that?" I told my father that I don't want to live anymore, that the world is cruel. I always wanted to fit in, just to be accepted. Then if I'm not being accepted and I'm trying, then let me die. After I consumed poison, the relationship with my family hasn't changed. They were all looking out for themselves to protect their reputation. It wasn't about me. My mother return was one of the happiest day of my life because it's who I was crying for every single day. All I wanted was a mother's love. And I never had that within that missing years. I lost my childhood. I lost my childhood when my mother wasn't there. And I knew my mother went for betterment for her children in another country. She came back, and when she came back was the best thing for my life. And I live with my mother and I stayed with my mother, and my mother is the only one who gave me her love to this day. It hasn't been easy, and if I'm living now, it's because of my mother. I want to live because of my mother, because I know what a mother's heart is. I know what my mother's been through, and I know how my mother feel about me. Until now, my mother would hold me in her arms and call me her baby, regardless of what I've been through. I was raped many times. There were days I would go out to the pasture for the cow and the goat, and I was raped then. The next day I was being raped by another person, laying down there, looking up at the sky. The trees are there, the cow are passing by, and I'm being pinned down helplessly. My attackers would say, "Take it." Many days I would wait for someone else, an older person who would go for their animals as well, to walk with them. But sometimes the animal that I'm looking for is farther, and my attackers would get me before I can escape. I knew most of my attackers because they were regular boys from my village. They were school boys when I'm passing on the street. They are regular church boys that goes to the church with me. My attackers assure me that I was going to be the one that will look shame in the end, and believing that even more, I never tell anyone. There wasn't anyone I could have told to really help me. In everybody's heart, I was putting on an act, or I was pretending. So if it should have gotten to the police, I wouldn't have gotten help, because everyone would have said, act normal to blend in, and if you do that, then these things wouldn't happen to you. And that's why I never tell anyone. All I wanted was an opportunity to leave Guyana because of what I've been through. I wasn't able to walk the street in peace. At one point, I was burnt and stabbed going home at night just because of who I was. I was working in a video shop in Georgetown. At that point, the technology has gotten better in Guyana, and I ended up in the internet cafe, and I would go in the gay chat room, and I would end up talking with all the gay men. I met with Prince in the Bahamas, and we became very good friends. He ensured that he's going to help me if I leave Guyana. I didn't know this person, but I was willing to take the chance, and I did. In order for me to get a job in the Bahamas, I had to leave the island, apply for a work permit, and go back to the island. I couldn't afford that financially. So my only alternative was to go back to Guyana. I never ask why I'm going through this, but I ask what's next for me. All else has failed. At least I know what to expect when I go back home, which was death. I went and I bought my ticket to go back to Guyana. When I bought my ticket, I sit in a park in the Bahamas and I was crying. An old lady came up to me and she said, "My child, why are you crying?" And I told her my story. She said, "Since your flight is going to be landing in Miami and you're changing planes, why don't you ask for asylum?" On my flight from the Bahamas to Miami, I was numb. I cried all day. I didn't know what to think, who to call, what to say, and what else to do. I said to myself, if this is my only chance, let me take it. So I went to the immigration officers and I told them I would not like to go back to Guyana because they will kill me. I feared death based on my gender identity, my imputed sexual orientation, and I would be persecuted to death. They tried to convince me to go back to Guyana, and they assure me that if I don't go back to Guyana, I will be banned from the US for many, many years. I told him I'm willing to take that chance. And the immigration officer took me into a room and locked me up there and told me that I was going to speak with another immigration officer, and that officer would determine if I have a fear of persecution or to go back to my country. And that officer would decide whether I stay or go back. I was later transferred into a detention center in Miami. After 3 days in that detention center, I heard officers saying that if they keep me there, I can be a liability to them. After 4 days, an officer waked me up in the wee hours of the morning and he said, "Pack your stuff, you're leaving." I wasn't sure if to ask him where I'm going or why am I packing. However, I packed my stuff and I was chained like a prisoner around my waist, my feet, and a handcuff in my hands, and I was taken to the airport. I was then transferred to Newark International Airport, where I walked like a criminal throughout the entire airport. I was detained in Elizabeth Detention Center for 2 months and 3 days. I was then placed in a dormitory with about 40 other male. Now, it still wasn't easy, but it was the US. I was gaining a little bit of respect, but men would still try to make passes at me because I was the closest thing to a female I'm sure they had seen in a long, long time. One of the officers asked me if I want to go into protected custody. They took me out, and that protected custody was a little segregation where someone who commits a crime goes there. There's an officer at the door 24/7. The officer told me that that's better off for you because in that way, you're not going to be a liability to us if someone should do anything to you. I was indeed very safe, but it wasn't easy for me because it was a little prison with 4 walls. I would have access to call my grandparents, which was once a day. I am very grateful that after that 2 months, my grandmother, who resides in the US, paid an attorney and got me out of there. Thank God for my grandparents, I was out on parole. My grandmother collected me and she brought me home to the home where she was living, and one of my other aunts cut my hair the next day. And I understand she did it because she too thought that I could have changed. I accepted because I was living in her house under her roof, and I'm grateful regardless. This is a stepping stone. It was the door that opened towards my happiness. After I stayed with my aunt and my grandmother here in New York, I got a job as a nail technician. And while I was doing nails, someone told me that why don't you go to beauty school? I took the woman's advice and I went to beauty school. 18 months after I graduated from beauty school, I started to work in a local hair salon and I opened my own business. While I was living my daily life here in New York, as a new person, I got myself an apartment and I moved from my aunt's house. In that way, I know there would be no one to tell me anything. I'm not under anyone's roof, and I was working. I was working and going to school. During that time, I started to transition slowly. I did not transition overnight. The very first time I took estrogen, I felt no difference. I don't know if it's because the way I was born, or the more hormones that my body had produced. I really didn't know, but it wasn't a big difference for me. But when I did my surgery, I felt all the difference. Some of the strength I have had, I grew weaker and I still feel almost the same me, but that's the little difference that I felt. I started gaining weight after my surgery. I got more curvy and I was told that, I've gained more hips, more of a complete 100% woman. Through my attorney, I started to get help psychologically to face my fears and to survive from my tortures. And that helps me. One doctor recommends me to another, where I have gotten a lot of help in terms of transitioning. Someone like me, I believe, would have been in a psychiatric ward by now, but I chose to stand on my 2 feet and be an advocate for other people who are going through the same thing. I just possess my degree as a surgical technologist. A surgical technologist is someone who assists in surgeries and maintains sterility in the operating room. I knew I wanted to do something more than my business, and one day I was looking up on the internet and I saw a lab technician, and I'm telling myself, at this age, would I be able to study or concentrate on more, especially science? Then I saw surgical technologists, and right away, this is what I wanted to be, in the operating room, because when I was going through my multiple surgeries, I wanted to know, what are they doing in that operating room, that little world by itself. And I decided to pursue that dream. And now I graduated as a surgical technologist and I'm working in surgeries. Living here in Richmond Hill as a trans woman, it's not bad and it's not easy either. It's a little West Indian community, and it reminds me of home. It reminds me of where I came from. I have gotten a lot of respect and admiration from some people. People look at you differently, the ones who know. In front of my face, I would hear people bashing me or saying that was a boy, or that is a boy. But I try not to bother with them because I know I've been through worse than that. At the same time, it's not easy and it doesn't give people the right to discriminate regardless of who you are. Because for me, I know I might be strong now, but I'm worried about my other sisters or brothers who's coming up and being bullied. So it's not right how they treat people in the community. I have seen so many trans women get killed, and I believe one of the greatest things that need to be done is education. Education and acceptance. Educate our people more about gender identity and gender dysphoria. Remove the ignorance and retain that with knowledge. Only then you would know how to accept someone and to understand what one is going through. My mother migrated here about 6 years ago. My mother gave me full support and love. My grandparents support me in every step of the way. Today, I'm just not a complete woman. I am a woman of quality, quantity, and a woman of substance. I've gained loyal friends who I want to thank for being there for me. I did not depend on them, but they were there that helped me through in times when I really needed them. Through my attorney, I met with other organizations and actresses and actors from different theater companies. Today, there's a play that featured on my life story. They use that play in almost all the colleges and universities across the US to inspire other people. I decided to share my story on the Caribbean Equality Project because, regardless of what problems they are going through or facing, there is help out there and they can make it. Believe in hope and faith and to fight with determination. My message to a boy in the West Indian community going through gender identity disorder: do not be ashamed of who you are. Stand up for yourself, because at the end of the day, at the end of the night, everyone else sleeps in peace except you. And what matters in life is inner peace. Give yourself that inner peace and be who you are, regardless of what it takes.